I'm casting about what are the policy levers that have us looking at the toolkit rather than the mode versus real estate, but saying, how do we create a policy that requires us to connect the dots between modes and services in transportation and the appropriate real estate?
Well, I'm not so sure it's a policy. Maybe it is. But I think it has to, if you're really going to be successful, I think you have to provide the technical assistance to the local community to help them realize whatever transformational change they're interested in. And so I think one of the most effective things that we do in Oregon, and there's a regional rural development association and a downtown association, both of which receive funds from both our land use planning agency and our transportation agency. And those NGOs go to communities around the state, very small towns, medium-sized towns, larger towns, and they work with the community. They have the full toolkit. Yeah, that's what their business is. And they have conversations with the leaders in those communities, the neighborhood leaders, the government, business leaders, and they then help them figure out what tools are available. So if I were going to invent a government program, I would invent a government program that provided greater funds to provide that kind of almost like SWAT teams for community development using real estate and transportation development tools to help communities go where they want to go. Because there are some communities that want to be the chi-chi boutique coastal resort, and there are other communities that want to be the industrial heart. And they really would be just as happy if they didn't have any residents, but they want the workers to be able to get to work. Well, they've got really they need to use different parts of the toolkit, and it's not our job to say that one town's right and the other town's wrong. We need to help them build vibrant communities of their own.
Yeah, let me just reinforce that, because that's what we're working on at the federal level with the new transportation bill, that the term of art is mode neutral, that you don't care what the outcome is. But going back to Gail's comment, and hopefully through the blueprint planning process, that's what you're going to be hearing a lot of, that metropolitan regions will be creating blueprint planning similar to what Oregon has done, similar to what California is now doing, similar to what Utah actually did one of the first ones called Envision Utah. And here is Republican Utah, and the governor, who became a secretary, Governor Leavitt, went into the Bush II cabinet, a great proponent of blueprint planning. And the blueprint plans, in my mind, should have at its base the economic drivers of your regional economy, just as Gail said. So how do you make a living in your metropolitan region, and then what is the transportation system that needs to be put in place to support that economy? And obviously you have to look into the future too. You can't just look backward. You need to take a look at where the economy could be going and put in the transportation system that will attract the 21st century economy. But it's economy first, transportation system second. Peter.
I want to remind the attendees that we are going to show all the transit connections that Ann Arbor is beginning to look at on the bus tours tomorrow. And this gets me to the question, how do you pay for this if the private sector is going to be responsible for doing it? How do you capture the increase in property taxes from all the future development to pay for it up front?
Something I'm spending a lot of time working on. And let me give you an example of a streetcar line, just one example that this could apply almost any place. This is a streetcar line in Washington, D.C. It goes between Union Station and the Minnesota station of the metro system. So it's connecting two major heavy rail lines of the metro system, which is a phenomenal system, the most important model of a subway system in this country that's paid phenomenal dividends. But it's basically connecting two radial lines with this lateral streetcar line, and it goes down H Street. The line costs $47 million to build. That assumes that the right-of-way is put in. So this is the deal. Let's assume that I'm a private equity investor coming to you as developers and say, look, I'm going to pony up $140 million. I'm going to credit enhance it. I'm going to put in the right-of-way. Now, you property owners along this right-of-way, you've got to make a judgment. Do you want this or do you not? What are you willing to pay me? What I'm going to ask you is, how much of your upside will you give me if I take this risk and put in the $140 million system? My sense as a developer, knowing what I know about the upside value creation, which is phenomenal as far as what rail transit can do to the underlying real estate value along the line here. And by the way, we did this based upon case studies of Portland, Seattle, and Tampa, the 3 modern streetcar lines in the country. So this is, our projections were based upon real case study look-backs over the last 10 years. And if I were sitting in your chair as a developer, I'd say I'd give you 25 to 40% of my upside, which means that, you know, I have no downside. You know, if I'm the developer, I have no downside. But if I make $1 more than I'm making now, I'll give 25 to 40 cents of that to whoever puts in that streetcar line. When you run the math, when you run the numbers, the entire line is paid for by 17% of the upside being captured and paying off the bonds. So let's assume that you guys said it was going to, I'll come in at 25%. That also gives you an additional 8% that could go to help subsidize the operations. It could go for affordable housing. It could go for whatever people want to do with that extra money. But it's not much. You can understand why we developers did it 100 years ago. If 17% of our profits paid for the sucker, that's a very easy return calculation to make.
I've got a comment on one other somewhat related topic, and it's the finance on the transportation side. And I think many states, certainly my state, has a constitutional dedication to the gas tax, and the gas tax can only be used for roads and highways. And the gas tax revenue, as one of our earlier speakers today mentioned, is declining because we're really promoting a switch to alternative fuel vehicles in order to meet greenhouse gas goals. And I believe that one of the other...
VMT's going down too, though.
The VMT, well. Yes. And so every transportation agency in the country has declining revenues. Cities, counties, right. States, everybody's revenue is declining. And I believe quite strongly that we need to go to a road user-based revenue system for...
Right. A VMT
tax.
A
VMT tax. But I would go a step further, and what we're having a conversation about now, and it's kind of a high-level conversation, and we try not to talk about road user fees too often in the public because
otherwise the White House might say we aren't going to do that.
Well, and we've got to get a lot of public education. We've got to do some of these experiments so people just don't completely panic when you say the word toll. But I think that when you start thinking about these new systems, if we started having a road user fee to replace the gas tax, and then we did congestion pricing on top of that, and we took that congestion pricing increment, which arguably is more than the base rate, if you think about basic utility rate setting, it's more than the base rate for the O&M and depreciation on the system. You could take that, those congestion pricing revenues and use the congestion pricing revenues to support light rail and streetcars and bicycle multi-use paths and all kinds of other things.
What that brings up is the fact that our highways have been massively subsidized for many years, even more so today. Yep. The Highway Trust Fund has been bailed out for a second time just 2 months ago because it's bankrupt. And the stimulus, of course, was we borrowed the money from the Chinese, naturally, to put it into the stimulus. So that's borrowed money coming out of the general fund to go into the transportation system. But great story. A woman came to a Brookings from China, and she's a transportation specialist. And she had just driven from Chicago to Washington. without